So today's topic is, does God exist? And what are the logical reasons for God exists? And this one on this screen is probably the most common that atheists hear is, God exists because it says that in the Bible and stuff. Okay? We can't use that as an argument with an atheist because they don't believe the Bible is true. You haven't built the foundation up where you can use the Bible as an authoritative word, which it is, and we'll get to that in session 5. But right away, when someone says that they are an atheist, you can't immediately just start throwing Bible verses at them. So what we're going to do is talk about some logical arguments that you can employ to help someone realize that God does exist. A couple quick definitions. So when I'm going to use these terms, we're all on the same page on what these terms mean. Okay, so the first one is atheist, which means they believe there is no God. Some atheists have tried to do a logical sidestep and say, well, no, I'm an atheist, which means I have a lack of belief that God exists. No, you believe there is no God. Don't let them get away with their logical sidestepping. Okay, they believe there is no God. The new atheist is a term that came about recently, and that means there is no God and religion is bad. Okay, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. But when someone says, hey, we're part of the new atheists, there's actually a few of them that are referred to as the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. There's some new atheist people who are really in pop culture and pounding that there is no God concept. The next thing is a materialist, which someone who says they're a materialist, they mean the physical world is the only thing that exists. Your mind, your consciousness, it doesn't exist outside your brain cells. It's not a physical thing. Okay? If you can't measure it, touch it, see it, taste it, it doesn't exist. That's a materialist. Now, most of the time, an atheist is going to be a materialist because that's the logical next step. And then finally, you're going to run into some people who say, I'm agnostic. And an agnostic would be an atheist who's a number 3 person. They want to avoid the conversation. They don't really want to talk about it. My human reason is incapable of providing sufficient rational grounds to justify either the belief that God exists or the belief that God does not exist. I'm not going to take a stand on anything. I'm on the fence. You can believe what you want. They can believe what they want. I'm not going to believe anything. Here's some statistics for you. A Gallup poll in 2016, this is of the United States. So Christians came in at 72%. Agnostics came in at 18%. So you're, at any given time, if you're in a room with 10 people, 2 of them are going to be hardcore atheists, that they're going to say, I'm definitely atheist. Okay? So you had 2.6 no response, 2.5 other, so that's like all the other side religions. Jewish 2.1, Mormon 1.8, and Muslim 0.8. A recent poll, and I mean recent as in last week, Wall Street Journal released a poll where 30% of millennials and Generation Z, so that would be the younger folk, said that religion was important. Now, if you flip that on its head, that means 70% of the people that they polled who were Generation Z or millennials said that religion was not important. They might attach themselves to one of these religions in a poll and just say, yeah, I'm Christian. But when they're asked this specific question, does religion matter? They're going to say, no, it doesn't matter. So the number of atheist agnostics that you're going to run into is probably about half and half. Okay? That they just don't think it has any bearing on their life. So new atheism, here's probably, I'll bring up these people's names because they're the ones that are actively targeting God. Okay, Richard Dawkins wrote a book called The God Delusion. Okay, these atheists don't just believe that there is no God, they believe that your belief in God is wrong. Okay, Sam Harris wrote a book, The End of Faith. And if you read the fine print here, it says, Religion, Terror, and the Future of Reason. Christopher Hitchens wrote a book that says, God is not great. How Religion Poisons Everything. Okay? So these are the pop culture atheists. These are the types of books that are being written. And one would think that because these are were all New York Times best-selling books, that us as Christians, theists, that's the nerdy term for people who believe in God, theists have not a leg to stand on. But the truth of the matter is, when you actually go on YouTube and watch debates between PhD-level Christians and PhD-level atheists, the Christians pound the atheists regularly, and it's not even close. I mean, these debates get millions of views, and in fact, in a recent proposed debate between Dr. William Lane Craig, he's a Christian theist, and Richard Dawkins just didn't show. They had a chair with his name on it, and he didn't show because they just keep losing. And so we're going to go through today two of the arguments that these top PhD level people use when they debate atheists. Okay? And when you talk to someone who's an atheist or agnostic, their arguments for why they are atheist or agnostic are usually going to fall into one of three categories. Either reason, meaning, hey, it's irrational to believe in this supernatural thingy-bob. Or morality, meaning like, hey, you remember those crusades and how they killed a whole bunch of people? Religion is evil. Or three, science, meaning science has proven that God, doesn't exist. We know now where lightning comes from, so we don't need Thor or any other gods. Today we're going to focus on number 1 and number 2. So today we're going to focus on some logic.
I think I'd have to go with the shark.
I would have to go with the lion.
Really?
What are y'all talking about?
Shark versus lion cage match. Who do you take?
Well, is the cage in the water or out of the water?
Obviously, the cage is in the water, but there's a little island in the middle of it.
Not so obvious, but yeah, I'll go with you. I'll take the shark.
Why?
This is my gut.
Wrong. No gut.
That's not how you play shark versus lion.
If you want to weigh in on shark versus lion, that's fine, okay? But it's not the time for women's intuition. You need logic and reason. That's what we're looking for in this discussion.
But a shark and a lion would never logically fight each other.
You put a cage around a lion on a little island in a water tank with a shark in it, I think it's a logical conclusion that you will have a fight on your hands.
But why would anyone ever do that?
Hello? So they would know who would win between a lion and a shark.
Yeah, do you have another way of getting a lion and a shark to fight each other?
Why do we want them to fight in the first place?
Because it would be awesome.
You can't see that, can you? Can you not see that a lion fighting a shark would be awesome?
How are you not getting this?
Can you imagine going through your life not realizing the awesomeness of things?
No, I cannot imagine that.
You know what that's called? Being a girl.
So that's the type of logic we're going to use today. No, I take that back. We're not going to use that kind of logic. We're going to use two of the most common arguments for God. There's actually 7 defended arguments for God. I didn't know this. Obviously, I didn't make these up. I did a bunch of research to find out. 3 through 7 are crazy in depth. Okay? They look like this kind of thing. Okay? It's possible that a maximally great being exists. If it's possible that a maximally blah, blah, blah. Like, when you start watching YouTube videos of debates, of people debating these kinds of arguments, it's whooshed right over your head. Okay? Now, this actual argument is logically sound. And in fact, numbers 1 through 6, no one actually debates. They just debate number 7. So it's interesting that there's all these arguments that God exists, and almost all of them are very old. In fact, the one that we're going to talk about right now, the cosmological argument, came around about 1,000 years ago. And so it's been refined and refined and refined and defended. So when I use the phrase that these arguments are logically sound, what that means is that it follows the argument concept of I have a premise, or I have reasons, 1, 2, 3, and then I have a conclusion. Okay? And for someone to say that the conclusion is invalid, they have to attack one of the reasons. Okay? So let's watch a short video on the first one.
Does God exist? Or is the material universe all that is, or ever was, or ever will be? One approach to answering this question is the cosmological argument. It goes like this: whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore, the universe has a cause. Is the first premise true? Let's consider. Believing that something can pop into existence without a cause is more of a stretch than believing in magic. At least with magic, you've got a hat and a magician. And if something can come into being from nothing, then why don't we see this happening all the time? No, everyday experience and scientific evidence confirm our first premise. If something begins to exist, it must have a cause. But what about our second premise? Did the universe begin, or has it always existed? Atheists have typically said that the universe has been here forever. The universe is just there, and that's all. First, let's consider the second law of thermodynamics. It tells us the universe is slowly running out of usable energy, and that's the point. If the universe had been here forever, it would have run out of usable energy by now. The second law points us to a universe that has a definite beginning. This is further confirmed by a series of remarkable scientific discoveries. In 1915, Albert Einstein presented his general theory of relativity. This allowed us, for the first time, to talk meaningfully about the past history of the universe. Next, Alexander Friedmann and George Lemaitre, each working with Einstein's equations, predicted that the universe is expanding. Then in 1929, Edwin Hubble measured the red shift in light from distant galaxies. This empirical evidence confirmed not only that the universe is expanding, but that it sprang into being from a single point in the finite past. It was a monumental discovery, almost beyond comprehension. However, not everyone is fond of a finite universe, so it wasn't long before alternative models popped into existence. But one by one, these models failed to stand the test of time. More recently, 3 leading cosmologists, Arvind Borde, Alan Guth, and Alexander Vilenkin, prove that any universe which has on average been expanding throughout its history cannot be eternal in the past, but must have an absolute beginning. This even applies to the multiverse, if there is such a thing. This means that scientists can no longer hide behind a past eternal universe. There is no escape. They have to face the problem of a cosmic beginning. Any adequate model must have a beginning, just like the standard model. It's quite plausible then that both premises of the argument are true. This means that the conclusion is also true. The universe has a cause. And since the universe can't cause itself, its cause must be beyond the space-time universe. It must be spaceless, timeless, immaterial, uncaused, and unimaginably powerful, much like God. The cosmological argument shows that, in fact, it is quite reasonable to believe that God does exist.
So looking at the actual argument itself and how you can talk to somebody is following these simple steps. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. This was such a monumental discovery in the 20s when they, as the video talked about, Edwin Hubble discovered the redshift, and they did these mathematical proofs to prove the Big Bang. And what we've seen is pop culture twist the Big Bang into saying, oh, look at the Big Bang, therefore God doesn't exist. It's actually the Big Bang proved this theorem to be correct. Because the Big Bang proves that the universe began to exist, it proves that the universe has a cause. And if the universe has a cause, then we have to look at what caused the thing. And these are simple things that you can talk to. Even young kids, my young 5th grade kids, understand this concept. Okay? That this book beginning to exist, it couldn't have been created by the book. Then that book would be the first book. Right? The universe can't have created itself, because then that would have been the first universe. Okay? So it has to be outside the properties of the universe. Spaceless, timeless, immaterial. Right? Space began to exist at the Big Bang. Time began to exist. Material began to exist. And we know it has to be extremely powerful. And it has to be intelligent. The universe is insanely complex. You know, the periodic table and physics and all the math and all the stuff that goes into the universe existing is crazy complex. So if we look at the properties of the thing that had to have created the universe, it had to have these properties: spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, and intelligent. And what you can do is take someone who says they're an atheist and lead them through this basic concept and say, well, I'm going to take those 5 things and I'm going to refer to that entity as God. You can call them whatever you want, but I'm going to call them God. So we'll watch a short video to show you the state of the argument. So when you're talking uber PhD people arguing this concept, the titans, you know, if you want to say the 2 big dogs are William Lane Craig, who's a theist, and Richard Dawkins, who's an atheist. And so this is William Lane Craig talking about Richard Dawkins' latest book.
Dawkins does, as I say, address this version of the cosmological argument. Remarkably, however, he doesn't dispute either premise of the argument. Instead, he merely questions the theological significance of the argument's conclusion. He writes, and I quote, "Even if we allow the dubious luxury of arbitrarily conjuring up a terminator to an infinite regress and giving it a name, there is absolutely no reason to endow that terminator with any of the properties normally ascribed to God: omnipotence, omniscience, goodness, creativity of design, to say nothing of such human qualities as listening to prayers, forgiving sins, and reading innermost thoughts." Now, apart from the opening slur, this is a remarkably concessionary statement. Dawkins doesn't dispute that the argument proves the existence of an uncaused, beginningless, changeless, immaterial, timeless, spaceless, and unimaginably powerful personal creator of the universe. He merely complains that this cause hasn't also been shown to be omnipotent, omniscient, good, creative of design, listening to prayers, forgiving sins, and reading innermost thoughts. So what?
There's Dawkins' empty seat.
The argument was never intended to prove such things. It would be a bizarre form of atheism, indeed one not worth the name, which admitted that there exists an uncaused, beginningless, changeless, immaterial, timeless, spaceless, and unimaginably powerful personal creator of the universe, who may, for all we know, also possess the further properties listed by Dawkins. We needn't call the personal creator of the universe God if Dawkins finds this unhelpful or misleading, but the point remains that such a being as is here described must exist.
So in that video, what Craig is talking about is that Dawkins, so you're talking the leading PhD writer of the God delusion book, who says there is no God, concedes that there is an entity that created the universe, that is spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, intelligent, and is a personal being. Well, that is the weirdest form of atheism I've ever heard. Okay? So when we're talking to somebody, we said one of our main tactics is to not come out with a hammer and say, I believe this, and I believe this, and I believe this, is to ask questions to pull out from them what they believe. And as you pull out from them what they believe, you'll get that earworm going on where they recognize the incoherence of what they believe. So here are some suggested questions. Okay? So this is when someone's talking about the Big Bang or the beginning of the universe, you just have to keep asking the question, well, where did that come from? Well, where did that come from? Where did that come from? And at the end of that question line, they'll have to, if they're logical at all, you'll get to some sort of entity that created it. Okay, where did that come from? If you actually look up on Wikipedia, what is the Big Bang Theory, it starts with all the matter of the universe was condensed into a single point. Well, where did that come from? Okay. Next question, where did time come from? How did we get time? How did time start? Okay, again, that's with the Big Bang. Where did matter come from? You can just ask, well, where did it come from? Where did it come from? Where did it come from? This is kind of a more technical one, and we'll get into it later. But basically, scientists or atheists have said, well, the universe came from a quantum vacuum, and it wasn't God, it was a quantum vacuum of energy that kick-started the universe. Where did that come from? Right? Where did energy come from? What kick-started the Big Bang? You know, these are all questions where you don't have to come out and say, well, the Big Bang proves that there's God. Well, now you have the burden of proof. Okay, keep the burden of proof on them and just keep asking these leading questions, and you're leading them down the path to get to the point where, oh, something must have kick-started it and started the whole thing off. And what do you think kick-started it? We know that it can't be made of matter. Otherwise, then what made that, right? You just have to keep going back to the beginning. So the next argument we're going to talk about is the moral argument. And before we can talk about the moral argument, we have to define a couple terms. And these are terms that some people struggle with understanding, but they're going to use them a lot, so we have to make sure that we're on top of them. Okay? The first term is subjective. Okay? Subjective. A subjective argument is saying vanilla is the best ice cream flavor, okay? I believe that. I enjoy vanilla. If I'm choosing a milkshake, I tend to choose vanilla because it's the best, and you're all wrong, okay? Subjective, okay? That means the truth of it is in the subject, me, the subject, subjective, okay? Turn-based video games are stupid, okay? This is also another true statement for me. If any of you play turn-based video games, they're dumb. Like Fire Emblem. It's a turn-based game. It's so boring. I can't take it. It's horrible. Again, subjective. These are subjective statements. The other thing to think about is objective. So this is the opposite of subjective, is objective. 2 + 2 is 4. That's true for you, and you. It's true for everybody across time forever, no matter what. Okay, it has nothing to do with the subject. It only has to do with the object. The sky is blue. This is objectively true. Okay? Murder is wrong. Okay? That's objectively true across all time for everyone. Okay? The big thing to think about is subjective truth. What it really boils down to is an opinion. It is your opinion. Okay, it's my opinion that vanilla is the best. It's my opinion that turn-based video games are dumb. Okay? It's not my opinion that murder is wrong. Okay? So let's look at the moral argument.
Can you be good without God? Let's find out. absolutely astounding. There you have it. Undeniable proof that you can be good without believing in God. But wait, the question isn't, can you be good without believing in God? The question is, can you be good without God? See, here's the problem. If there is no God, what basis remains for objective good or bad, right or wrong? If God does not exist, objective moral values do not exist. And here's why. Without some objective reference point, we have no way of saying that something is really up or down. God's nature provides an objective reference point for moral values. It's the standard against which all actions and decisions are measured. But if there's no God, there's no objective reference point. All we're left with is one person's viewpoint, which is no more valid than anyone else's viewpoint. This kind of morality is subjective, not objective. It's like a preference for strawberry ice cream. The preference is in the subject, not the object. So it doesn't apply to other people. In the same way, subjective morality applies only to the subject. It's not valid or binding for anyone else. So, in a world without God, there can be no evil and no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. God has expressed His moral nature to us as commands. These provide the basis for moral duties. For example, God's essential attribute of love is expressed in His command to love your neighbor as yourself. This command provides a foundation upon which we can affirm the objective goodness of generosity, self-sacrifice, and equality. And we can condemn as objectively evil greed, abuse, and discrimination. This raises a problem. Is something good just because God wills it, or does God will something because it is good? The answer is neither one. Rather, God wills something because He is good. God is the standard of moral values, just as a live musical performance is the standard for a high-fidelity recording.
Without your love.
The more a recording sounds like the original, the better it is. Likewise, the more closely a moral action conforms to God's nature, the better it is. But if atheism is true, there is no ultimate standard. So there can be no moral obligations or duties. Who or what lays such duties upon us? No one. Remember, for the atheist, humans are just accidents of nature, highly evolved animals. But animals have no moral obligations to one another. When a cat kills a mouse, it hasn't done anything morally wrong. The cat's just being a cat. If God doesn't exist, we should view human behavior in the same way. No action should be considered morally right or wrong. But the problem is, good and bad, right and wrong, do exist. Just as our sense experience convinces us that the physical world is objectively real, our moral experience convinces us that moral values are objectively real. Every time you say, "Hey, that's not fair, that's wrong, that's an injustice," you affirm your belief in the existence of objective morals. We're well aware that child abuse, racial discrimination, and terrorism are wrong for everybody, always. Is this just a personal preference or opinion? No. The man who says that it is morally acceptable to rape little children is just as mistaken as the man who says 2 + 2 = 5. What all this amounts to, then, is a moral argument for the existence of God. If God does not exist, objective moral values and duties do not exist. But objective moral values and duties do exist. Therefore, God exists. Atheism fails to provide a foundation for the moral reality every one of us experiences every day. In fact, the existence of objective morality points us directly to the existence of God.
So let's look at the moral argument. Again, I've picked another one that's easy to understand and very straightforward and easy to talk to somebody about. Number one, if God does not exist, objective moral values do not exist. So again, objective moral values that are true for everyone, everywhere. Objective moral values do exist. And we know that from our experience. We know that they exist. We know that murder is wrong. We know that. It's not just my opinion. Therefore, God exists. A couple quotes that I found super interesting on this topic. Number one was actually in the video, and if you were quick to read, Dr. Michael Ruse is an atheist. Okay? He's an atheist, but he concedes this fact. The man who says that it's morally acceptable to rape little children is just as mistaken as the man who says 2 + 2 = 5. Okay? So if moral objections or objective morals exist, who gave them to us? How do we know they exist? Who put them into us? Where did they come from? If it's not my opinion and it's objective, then it must have come from somewhere. And where did it come from? Okay? Here's another quote for you. All moral judgments are value judgments. That all value judgments are subjective and that none can be proved either right or wrong. Okay? That would be a hardcore atheist. That's someone who's not going to give ground on the moral argument. They're going to say everything in life is subjectively moral. You decide what's right and wrong. The rest of the quote. In any case, let me assure you, my dear young lady, that there is absolutely no comparison between the pleasure that I might take in eating a ham and the pleasure I anticipate in raping and murdering you. This was a quote from Ted Bundy, a woman who wrote a biography, had it recorded on audio. This is someone who, Ted Bundy, for all of his flaws, he understood morality. And when he bought into subjective morality, he realized he could do whatever he wanted. I can do what's right for me. Okay? Mao in China understood subjective morality. Okay? He was an atheist. Hitler understood subjective morality. We can decide what's right for us if there's no objective morality. I'll pause this, do a quick setup. So this video, I think, is the first time you're seeing a video from this gentleman, Frank Turek. He wrote an awesome book that says, I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. It's a great book. And he goes around and most of what he does is goes to colleges, universities, and just lets kids ask him questions. So here's a video of a kid arguing the moral argument with him.
Hello, I'm Nathaniel.
Nathaniel.
No, so you make 3 specific arguments for the existence of God.
So just, this is what happens. He sets up a mic and a giant line forms and he just answers question after question after question.
Creative argument, an argument for design, and an argument for morality. I first off would like to try and take down the argument on morality.
Go ahead.
Because it's not actually an argument for the existence of a God. It's the argument for the fact that we should have an idea of an existence of a God. Because otherwise there would be no moral basis from which we could sit on. And I disagree with that because I feel that humans are inherently altruistic and moral.
Okay, all right, stop there for just a second, Nathaniel. What do you mean by altruistic and moral?
Notice
we
his
are
question.
giving and we care about each other.
Why is that good?
Why is that good? Because it helps our species survive.
Why is it good to survive?
Because then we can propagate and move on as a species and continue to exist.
So why is that a good thing? Who said?
Why is that a good thing?
Yeah.
Because that is what it is.
Well, that's an is. That's not an ought, though. Stalin would say, fine, Nathaniel, I'm going to survive by killing you and taking your stuff. Why is he wrong?
Because Stalin would have the initial urge not to. He would feel that the inherent urge of humans is to be caring for one another. There are situations where humans will not be caring about one another, and those are exceptional. But because humans are inherently altruistic, his first urge would be to take care of the person or try and help them. But if he has some motivation against that, then he would no longer have that urge. And he would decide that he wants to kill them because he has a reason to.
Well, again, I think you're begging the question as to what altruism is. Why is taking care of others a good thing if there is no God? That's your opinion. Is there an external referent, an authoritative, unchanging referent that you're getting that opinion from, which makes it objective, or is it just something you feel?
Humans, so if you take it from the stance that this is something that is consistent throughout humanity, that we care about one another, then we could superpose that as a moral impulse that we have.
Okay, let me agree with you. I think we do have a moral impulse. And that's exactly what C.S. Lewis said in The Abolition of Man, when he looked at all the diverse cultures and he said, they agree on basic morality. Now, how do you explain that basic morality? Well, there's maybe different ways to explain it, but some will say that's because God has written it on our hearts. But the issue isn't how we know it. The issue is, why is altruism, as you put it, or caring for one another, a good thing? Who said?
It's not necessarily that who said, it is what is. We are altruistic. There is no need for someone to say that it is a good thing. It is what we are.
But if Hitler or Stalin comes along and says, I don't want to be altruistic, I want to be selfish and take everything for myself, and if I have to kill you to do that, I'm going to do that, why is that objectively wrong?
Because he is not taking care of other people.
Who said it's... Where are you getting this standard this objective standard that you ought to take care of people? Where does that come from if there's no God?
So I'm just going to talk about a little example that I know of and some others. So there's 3 different points I'd like to make. First off, we still exist. If we did not take care of each other as a social species, we would have very, very limited capabilities of still existing. We need to band together. We need to take care of each other. We need to be friendly to one another.
That's presupposing that survival is a good thing. Why is it a good thing? And why us surviving? Why not roaches? Or antelope? Or black widow spiders?
Why do you need the concept of good there? We're still surviving, and we're being nice, kind to each other. We are being caring for one another.
Forgive me, Nathaniel, but you're stealing the standard of goodness from God's universe to try and make your worldview work. But if there is no objective, authoritative moral standard beyond us, then atheism doesn't work.
You know, I think you're right. There is something to that. The idea of...
So he just comes around and realizes, I'm going down a path I can't keep going down. Who told you that was right? Who told you that was morally correct? Who said it was true? Who said it was good? Who's defining these things for you? And it's interesting to watch these as these, 19-year-olds are like, click, oh, yeah, something outside of all of this wrote it on our hearts and said that it was definitely wrong to kill, objectively, outside of anybody else. Okay? Now, an interesting thing is in the video, Richard Dawkins has a line that's often quoted that this is all there is, it's blind, pitiful indifference, something like that. Well, in his books, and when he's pressed on it, when he's asked, like, well, is murder wrong? I mean, you said this is all that exists. He acquiesces and says, yeah, it's wrong. So they know that there's this split where you can't have it both ways. You can't have no God and this is all that it is, then you should be able to do whatever you want. And I've never had the guts to do this, but when someone said this, I've always just wanted to slap them, literally, and be, why are you mad? Why are you mad? That's your opinion that this is wrong. My opinion is I was right to do it. It's your opinion. Why should I listen to your opinion? Okay? You have to separate it out into objective versus subjective. Now, I'm trying to click this link down here, which isn't letting me. I'll just get out of here and then click it. Ha, I win.
Thank you. Next question.
My question is to do with objective moral values.
All right.
It's, I guess, going to the passage in Exodus talks about the Ten Commandments. Obviously, one of the Ten Commandments is to not kill and also to not lie. So, I guess my question is, if there are some situations in life where it is actually morally right to kill in self-defense or to lie to protect somebody, does that not undermine the idea that there are objective moral values and that actually God is morally relativistic?
No, I don't think it does. And here you'll notice that I use the language of objective moral values rather than absolute moral values. And that is deliberate. To say they're absolute moral values could be taken to mean that certain moral duties hold regardless of the circumstances you're in. So thou shalt not kill regardless of the fact that a terrorist is about to kill your wife and children. What I'm talking about is objective moral values, which means that in any given situation in which you might find yourself, there is something that is really right and really wrong, independently of human opinion. But clearly that might vary with the circumstances. In some cases it would be morally permissible to kill, but in other cases it would be morally impermissible to kill. So what I'm talking about is objective right and wrong, but not necessarily absolutes that take no cognizance of the circumstances in which a person finds himself.
Okay, thanks. Thank you for your question.
So again, that was Dr. William Lane Craig, and he does the same thing. He goes around and just lets kids line up and just answers question after question after question after question. So the thought process that these concepts are dead is just not true. Where they're just getting a huge revival because of YouTube, honestly, because people can go out and watch these debates. So again, using our technique, we don't want to just come in with a hammer and start swinging at somebody. We want to use questions to help them guide and lead the way. And one of the reasons I chose that video from Frank Turek is you saw that his whole interaction with that kid was question, 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 question. I think he maybe said one or two statements. He just kept asking him questions and questions and questions. And so, a question is, how do you know what is good? Who told you that murder is bad? Did you see Dr. Turek use that a lot? Who told you that? Who determined? Where'd you get this from? The young man kept saying altruism. Where did you get this idea? How do you know this is the right idea? Is premeditated, cold-blooded murder bad? Is that just your opinion? Or is it always bad? Here's one that I like. If 5 people were living on an island and 4 out of the 5 voted to kill the 5th person, is that wrong? They voted on it. They voted. They decided together. Okay, is that still wrong? Just because they all got together and decided it was right, did that make it right? And obviously the answer is no, because it's not subjective morality. It's objective morality. So before I move on to this tip, those are 2 simple arguments that you can go through. There's 7 arguments proving the existence of God. Some of them are a lot more complicated than this. I chose these 2 arguments because they're very easy. There's only 3 points to each one, and those reasons are innate to us. We understand that. Science proves that the universe had a beginning, so if something began, something had to begin it. And once you think about something began it, then what began it? You can easily walk someone through the logic of these statements. Okay? Here's a logic trap that when we talk about morality, we have to look at. And when the concept of logic is something that's been around since early Greece, and so a lot of these terms for logic are in Latin, and the official term is called ad hominem. And what this means is it's the Latin for towards the man. And so what you'll see when you talk to someone is that they'll twist the argument towards a specific person, right? How can there be a God, if there was the Crusades? Or if Hitler exists, how can there be a God? Right? So they're directing towards the person as opposed to towards the truth statement. Right? They're not attacking the truth, they're attacking the person. Okay? So it's something to be aware of. So when you're talking to someone, be aware when they twist it. And the easiest way to get around it is just to accept their statement as true, as just say, yeah, that was wrong. And what does the Crusades have anything to do with Christianity being right or wrong? Okay? So don't let the actions of one or even many affect what is truth. Okay? So as a summary, we've been talking about the debates about does God exist, and you can go out and watch them, but I had a quick summary here. This is from an online magazine called Common Sense Atheism, and this online magazine really feels that the common sense is to be atheist. That's the most logical choice, and this is a review that they had from a 2009 debate. Craig was flawless and unstoppable. Hitchens was rambling and incoherent with the occasional rhetorical jab. Frankly, Craig spanked Hitchens like a foolish child. I mean, that's how these debates go, because the logic is airtight. Perhaps Hitchens realized how bad things were for him after Craig's opening speech, as even Hitchens' rhetorical flourishes were not as confident as usual. Hitchens wasted his cross-examination time with questions like, if a baby was born in Palestine, would you rather it be a Muslim baby or an atheist baby? What does that have to do with anything? He did not even bother to give his concluding remarks, ceding the time to Q&A. Okay? So this is a professional debate between PhD-level people, and the atheist just conceded and didn't even do his final talk. So let's get into the actual responses that are actively debated. And it was talked upon in the video. The first one is the multiverse. So what happens is we say, okay, the universe had to have something created. Well, there's just a whole lot of universes, and there's a multiverse, and we're just one of many universes, which obviously there's no proof. We can't empirically prove that at all. But the problem with that concept is that's just moving. If we ask our questions, who made that, that just pushes the question up one notch. Okay, well, who made all the multiverses? Just push it up one notch. Okay. The next thing that's being promoted heavily is this quantum vacuum. And I don't want to go too deep into the quantum vacuum or gravity. So Stephen Hawking, before he passed away, his recent book, he put forth the concept that it's the combination of a quantum vacuum and the law of gravity that created the universe. That's where they're standing now. And here's a great video that talks about that.
Hawking and Mlodinow seem to realize that they have not yet answered the question, why is there something rather than nothing? For they return to this question in their concluding chapter and give a quite different answer. There, they explain that there is a constant vacuum energy contained in empty space. And if the universe's positive energy associated with matter is evenly balanced by the negative energy associated with gravitation, then the universe can come spontaneously into being as a fluctuation of the energy in the vacuum, which by a clever sleight of hand, they say, we may as well call zero. Now, this seems to be a very different account of the universe's origin, for it presupposes the reality of space and the energy in it. So it's puzzling when Mlodinow and Hawking conclude, and I quote, because there is a law like gravity, the universe can and will create itself from nothing in the manner described in chapter 6. Here, it's said that the nothingness spoken of in chapter 6 is not really nothingness after all, but is space filled with vacuum energy. But space filled with vacuum energy is hardly nothing, and certainly doesn't exist prior to the South Pole in the model. All this goes to reinforce the conviction that the no-boundary approach only describes the evolution of our universe from its origin at the South Pole to its present state, but is silent as to why the universe came to exist in the first place.
So that's the state of the top-level atheists right now. Stephen Hawking, one of the smartest men that's ever lived, his best reason that he could come up with was gravity created the universe. And a fifth grader can even ask the question, what made that? I mean, that's where they are, okay? So as students, anybody high school, middle school, college age, you can be rest assured that it's not science that has told you that there is no God. Even at the top level of science, they have no answer to these logic arguments. The only argument that atheists fall back on, finally, is that evil does exist and a loving God won't allow it. So that, to me, that's the only argument that's left. And there's a two-part video that is really good talking about it. I'm only going to play the first part because the second part is really just a math problem on the probability, and it goes through this 9-minute math problem. Trust me, the math works out. So I think the first one is much more coherent, and when you're talking to somebody, at college or high school or middle school or at your work, you're probably not going to get into deep levels of probability.
We are all well aware of the suffering and evil in the world. Horrific suffering, unspeakable evil. How then can anyone believe in the existence of an all-loving, all-powerful God? And if God does exist, why would anyone want to worship Him? Epicurus framed the logical problem of suffering and evil like this. If God is willing to prevent evil but not able, then He's not all-powerful. If He is able to prevent evil but not willing, He is not good. But if He is both willing and able, how can evil exist? And if He is neither able nor willing, then why call Him God? In other words, it's logically impossible for God and suffering to both exist. But we know full well that suffering exists. Therefore, God does not. Is this a good argument? Let's look at it more closely. Are these two statements logically inconsistent? No. Here is an example of two logical inconsistent statements. David can't be both married and a bachelor. But there is no explicit contradiction between these two statements. So there must be hidden assumptions behind this argument that would bring out the alleged contradiction. Here they are. If God is all-powerful, He can create any world He wants. And if God is all-loving, He prefers a world without suffering. So, if an all-powerful, all-loving God exists, it follows that suffering does not exist. Since suffering obviously does exist, the atheist concludes that God must not exist. But are the atheist's two hidden assumptions necessarily true? Consider the first assumption. Can God create any world He wants? What if He wants a world populated by people who have free will? It's logically impossible for God to force someone to freely choose to do good. Forcing free choices is like making a square circle. It's not logically possible. It's not that God lacks the power to perform the task. It's that the supposed task itself is just nonsense. So, it may not be feasible to create a world populated by people who always freely choose to do what is morally good. So the first assumption is not necessarily true. Therefore, the argument fails. And what about the second assumption? Is it necessarily true that God would prefer a world without suffering? How could we possibly know this? We all know of cases where we permit suffering in order to bring about a greater good. If it's even possible that God allows suffering in order to achieve a greater good, then we cannot say this assumption is necessarily true. For the logical problem of suffering to succeed, the atheist would have to show that it's logically impossible that free will exists, and that it's logically impossible that God has good reasons for permitting suffering. This burden of proof is too heavy to bear. It's quite possible that God and suffering both exist. This is why philosophers, even atheist philosophers, have given up on the logical problem of evil.
We can concede that the problem of evil does not, after all, show that the central doctrines of theism are logically inconsistent with one another. Some philosophers have contended that the existence of evil is logically inconsistent with the existence of a theistic God. No one, I think, has succeeded in establishing such an extravagant claim. It's now acknowledged on almost all sides that the logical argument is bankrupt.
But this is hardly the end of the discussion. We still need to explore.
So, like I said, there's a part 2, and the part 2 has to do with the probability. But really, the suffering and evil, what it boils down to is we don't like it. We don't like it. We think it shouldn't be there, and we don't like it. And that actually doesn't have any effect on God, whether we like it or don't like it. And one of the easiest concepts in the suffering and evil is to look at free will, that we wouldn't have love without free will. If we were forced to do something, then love wouldn't exist, because you can't force someone to love. And if you want love to exist, then you have to have free will to exist. And if you have free will to exist, you have to allow someone to choose evil. And so it stinks, and we hate it, and that's one of the reasons when you talk to someone who's moved away from God, a lot of times it's because of an emotional event in their life has happened. Something's happened that made them mad. They're just mad about it. They didn't want it to happen, and it's a tough situation. In the nature of time, I'm not going to play I want to leave some time for question and answer. I'm not going to play the Tim Keller video. He has a great video talking about the concept that Christianity has the answer to suffering. All other religions, their answer to suffering is, well, once you die or are reincarnated or go to another plane, then the suffering ends. Christianity has the answer today. Jesus comes alongside you right now, today, and can help you deal with what you're going through. And no other religion offers that. Islam, Judaism, all the pantheistic religions, they don't offer that as an option. It's everything once you die, then maybe you're in a better place. Christianity has the answer that it's happening today. And so we'll talk more about that when we get into Christianity in week 4. So just remember, you're trying to change an entire worldview. So a worldview is a concept that someone has that covers everything that they look at. It goes across all of their entire thought processes. And so we have to honor that and not force that, and take what the opportunity is there and just plant that seed in their mind. Ask those questions, like we saw Frank Turek do with that young man, asking the questions to lead them to the path. And so you have to study to learn what the path is and what thought processes goes into someone who doesn't believe in God, so that you can ask the right questions. So again, as a reminder, here's some resources. I talked to you about the I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist by Frank Turek. I don't have the book A Reasonable Response, but that's by Dr. William Lane Craig. There's a picture of it. Dr. William Lane Craig has by far the most videos and does the most debates and puts out the most content, podcasts every week on you can email him and he'll answer all kinds of stuff. This is someone who speaks German, French, English, 2 PhDs, He's a great resource. So again, we have a couple links for you. Capturing Christianity is a young man, I would estimate he's in his maybe mid-20s, who does a lot of great interviews with people just asking questions on what's on his mind. And he started the channel because his brother became an atheist, and he wanted to do research on how to talk to his brother. So it's a great resource.